Welcome back. Well, Australia has rubber-stamped a radical United Nations gender report which could be used to muzzle free speech. Last month, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade signed up to the UN statement which endorses so-called intersectional gender theory and promotes the idea that children should be able to choose their gender identity. Liberal Senator Claire Chandler from Tasmania is a forceful advocate on these and other issues. She joins me now from Hobart. Senator Chandler, thank you for your time. The coalition's in power, so why on earth are we giving something like this our backing?
Look, I think, Peter, often in these cases where we are seeing this radical gender ideology being pushed from is from within our bureaucracies. And I know that whenever I talk to public servants about these issues at estimates, then the answers are always not exactly satisfactory. When you're asking the Office for Women whether or how they define the term woman and they can't give you a response, it's pretty disappointing. And I think many Australians would look at this report from the UN that subscribes to radical gender identity theory, this intersectional gender identity politics, and completely dismisses anyone who criticises these views as pretty disappointing.
Look, I have to back you up. I mean, I remember in my time the Prime Minister saying X, Y and Z to public servants. You'd go away to an international conference and you'd find buried in a report that we were signing up to pretty much everything he said he didn't want to do, that, that the coalition wasn't going to sign up to, that all had to be stripped out at the last minute. So I don't know whether it's that they're not listening, that there's willful disobedience by the public service, or it's ministers not being across the brief, but stuff is being pushed by the public service. I think that's at odds with the government. But help us understand, what is this intersectional gender theory? If you're at home watching it, what does it mean practically?
Well, it's all based upon this idea that rights should be attached to someone's gender identity rather than their biological sex. And obviously this is a debate I've been quite intimately involved in over the last couple of years, and this is always done under the guise of inclusivity. But to be honest with you, Peter, it is far from inclusive. Radical gender theory is the language of people who make death threats against J.K. Rowling, the people who think that women should be forced to play sport against biological males, who think that biologically male sex offenders should be housed in women's prisons. There's nothing inclusive about it at all. And I think what our bureaucrats need to be incredibly careful of is when they're signing on to these documents under the guise of inclusivity, then they really need to be actually reading them and thinking very critically about what the ramifications of this ideology is.
I guess the worry is once these things are in place, they're a Trojan horse to then put in place domestic legislation that we are, told, the line. Oh, look, we have to have this in the domestic legislative agenda in Victoria or Australia or wherever, because otherwise we will not meet our international commitments. But no one signed up to the international commitments willingly. I mean, they don't go to an election. How do you stop this being a Trojan horse?
Look, I think you're entirely right, Peter, and we see this time and time again. I mean, the Sport Australia guidelines that I've been campaigning against since I first became a senator are a classic example of that. And I think the best way for us to get a common sense approach here is for everyday Australians to feel that they can speak up about these issues. And I know that is incredibly difficult. I myself have been subject to a complaint to the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Commissioner for my advocacy on these issues, but we have to be confident to speak up and hold our bureaucrats to account.